Constantine, a Hellblazer podcast.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome back. Today we are doing a special thing again. This is kind of a bringing back something we tried out a couple weeks ago when the first story arc, or the first couple story arcs of the Jamie Delano run ended. So we're doing Hell Talk today with me, and Hoku is returning. Say hi, Hoku.
Hello, everybody.
And yeah, we're going to talk about I guess it's the third arc. It's the Family Man arc, and then it's the issues in between that we're like breaking that one up. And we're just gonna go into that. So
oh yeah.
Yeah, it's gonna be cool because this is such a different arc than the Fear Machine and even Original Sins. I mean, it just compared to the other ones, it's so quick. Like it gets to the point.
It's my favorite so far, honestly.
Oh, really? Okay, cool. Yeah, I always liked this one a lot too. And not only that, but I mean, you're a Sandman fan, so it ties into Sandman loosely, which is cool too. So
when we got to those points, I was like, yes, even though it was just tiny little nugget.
Yeah,
I was still so happy. I was like, I know about that. That makes me happy. I feel like an insider.
Yes, exactly. So I was like, oh, she's gonna love, the little tie-ins with the serial killer convention and all that, and I knew you were gonna like it. So
you totally called it. I absolutely did.
Yes. So this arc, or this set of stories or set of issues is issue 23 through issue 31 that we're going to cover here, and that is the Family Man story arc and the little I guess interlude issues that kind of gave a break to Jamie Delano with his writing. I didn't even know why they did it. I saw no information. Yeah, it was weird. I don't have any information on why they did it, like if he was behind. But it goes like Family Man Part 1, and then it takes a break for 3 issues, and then Family Man Part 2. So
if it was planned, it was something completely unconventional, because who starts a new arc and then goes, hey, we're going to like diverge without telling like you anything. You just all of a sudden are, forget about that. Hey, here's this other weird thing we're going to do. And then you swing back and you're like, oh man, I was totally doing that because I didn't want to deal with this stuff. And you're like, whoa, okay, cool. Are we back on track now?
Yeah. I feel like that's like, you could do that easily though. Like if they wanted to put in, like if he's like, oh shit, I'm behind, or something came up and we need 3 issues quick, then they just put these filler issues in, and then you just go, wow, that was crazy that I did those things, huh? Well, back to what I'm doing, like, so.
It's like in Dragon Ball Z when it's like in between the bosses and they have Goku learning how to drive with Piccolo or some stuff like that, just random Gohan hanging out with a robot or some shit while he's training. You have those little side things because it's not quite caught up, or they're like, hey, our animators aren't, they're still working on the main story, but we're not quite there yet. Can you guys just throw in some random story, or the writer hasn't finished it yet, so they need to just put a little padding, a little buffer in there, and you're like, all right, here's some random shit to do. But at least they tied it back in at the end. So it made it seem like it was on purpose, which is probably the best way to do it, where you're not just foregoing and like, hey, we never talk about that again. Or like, it didn't happen. It was all in his mind or something like that. So the fact that they did keep it in continuity, I appreciated, even though it was weird.
Yeah, usually the way this goes is, there's a fill-in issue and it has nothing to do with anything other than at some point in the character's history, this happened, and it's just like a little side story. But this, the way that they did it, it was just cool that they fit it in. And then also, like, they got 2 A-list writers, right? You had Grant Morrison, who at the time was writing like Doom Patrol, and he was doing all his stuff. I think he'd written Arkham Asylum for Batman already too. And then you have, Neil Gaiman, who's fresh off of Sandman, or he's still in the middle of Sandman, I should say. He's like probably on issue 20 or 30 by this time. So that's going, and people were liking it, and it's winning all the awards and everything. So yeah, it was kind of interesting that they did that. But they got 2 people that are great writers to fill in. So normally you don't have that. Normally it's like some guy we've never heard of is writing an issue to fill in. We're trying him out, you know. So
Yeah.
it was nice that they had strong writers at least for that.
Two busy guys filling in for another busy guy. That's kind of funny how that worked out.
Yes, yeah, you know, maybe they had a story they wanted to tell, you know. And I think, I mean, honestly, especially the Neil Gaiman one, I was like, this is solid. I mean, that's one of the best issues of Hellblazer, in my opinion. But one thing about this arc that's interesting is there's like a 0 issue of the Family Man, which is issue 23. It's an issue that's tied into the Family Man arc, and you kind of need it to know what's going on in Family Man and why, but at the same time, you don't. Like, it's its own full story about John meeting his friend and like hanging out in his house, and it turns out his friend is like some kind of literary character, like Ahab from Moby Dick or something, and you know they have to run away from the fairy tale police, basically. And
yeah, like he's the basis for a bunch of different characters. So he's still in continuity, and that's why he wasn't allowed to leave yet. That's why he like broke their laws of like, hey, you're not in the public domain, wasn't it?
You're not public domain.
Which I love that. I thought that was amazing. I was like, oh my gosh, that is such a cool idea. Very Fables.
Yeah, I was wondering what you thought about. Yeah, it's like Fables, or like even some Sandman issues are like that too, where like the Shakespeare one, or you know, that kind of stuff. It's very literary, and it has to deal with all these literary characters.
Or just the idea that characters exist beyond our world and the world we've technically created. Like that just because we've created them doesn't mean they're not real. They are actually real. And I like the idea of them being able to cross over into our world, affect our world, even though, you know, we created them. It's a really just kind of a crazy mindfuck sort of an idea. I love that.
Yeah. And I think, you know, it's an interesting like change of pace from what was the Fear Machine, because the Fear Machine is so big and epic and serious and magical and mystical, and like you have to like here's some hard magic. Like do you understand?
And so many players.
Yeah, a lot of players. Everything's going on, and then this is like, all right, little one-off issue that leads directly into the Family Man killer storyline. And you wouldn't know it though. If you just read the issue, you're like, huh, that's interesting and weird and cool. But then it turns out that at the end of that issue, you know, it leads right into the first part of the Family Man, which is because John's living in his friend's house, who is gone now because he got arrested by the fairy tale police. So if you just pick that up, you're like, wait, why? What is this house? And why is it like torn apart and like full of books and weird shit? So you kind of need the context of who his friend was in order to understand why the Family Man comes there, in order to get the information on the family that he kills, the first family that he kills in the first issue of that. So it's like, yeah, you kind of need it, even though it doesn't. I don't even know if it's in the Family Man story arc, like in that collection.
Oh, like if it were a trade, huh?
Yeah, if it's this trade, I would put it in there because why not, right? But I'm not sure if they did.
Yeah, because it does start the next arc, because it has nothing to do with the previous one. So
yeah, and also let's talk about that for a second too. So, you know, the end of the end of the Fear Machine story arc, which is issue 22, that like just ends with Constantine being found at sea, just floating in the water by some fishermen or whatever. Then like they just cut to, anyway, enough of that. Issue 23. We don't even mention any of that shit other than, wow, that was weird. I'm going to go to my other friend. Like, so it's kind of fun how it like just drops that in case, you know, I guess people, you don't need to spend that much time on it, right? Because we spent 9 issues in the Fear Machine stuff. Right?
If you don't know about it, just go back and read it. He's not going to rehash it for you, which I was grateful for, because the last thing I need is like, you know, a few pages devoted to, man, I can't believe that happened. First this happened, and then this whole and like literally like rehashing it, remembering with panels and everything, you know, flashback sort of stuff. Like, I'm so glad they just didn't bother with any of that, because I really didn't want to go through it again.
That's one nice thing about Hellblazer, is unlike other characters like Swamp Thing, which is more classic style, like because he's so new and different, and they don't do any of that shit where it's like last time on, you know, they don't catch you up on anything. It's just like, well, here's an issue. And most of the time the issues are strong enough on their own that you'll like read it and be like, I don't know what's going on, but I like this. and I need to go back and get the other issues. Like that's how it worked with Hellblazer with me.
There's less what do you call it? Hand holding, I think is the word I'm thinking of.
Yes. And yeah, like I think the first stuff I ever read of Hellblazer was like from issue 140, and I just picked like a trade of a writer that I liked. And I was like, I don't even know. The only thing I know is the movie and this, so it's like, I'm going to try it. I'm going to try to read this. And it fit. Like, obviously there's continuity that builds, but the way that Jamie Delano writes, you don't have to know the other story arcs in order to jump in to these other issues, which I like a lot, especially because Fear Machine is, I think we both said last time, is our least favorite.
It's so far it is definitely the bottom of the three.
Yeah, and it's not, like I said, there's some cool ideas in it.
For sure.
But it definitely lasted
It was a lot.
Yeah. But this one is the opposite of that. And I wonder if he got feedback about it. I wonder if he got feedback from his editors or maybe other friends or something where it's like,
can you tone it down a little? Can you make it a little more concise? Give us a shorter arc if possible. Keep it under 6 maybe.
Yeah, let's do a 4. Let's do a tight 4. How about that? Like that's what, and it works. This story flows, especially if you just read the 4 issues of the Family Man story, that just flows really fast. But you throw in the Grant Morrison and Neil Gaiman issues in the middle of it, and it does pad it out, but not in a bad way. Like, because you're like, oh, I want to get back to this Family Man, even though these are really good. So the Family Man first issue, which is issue 24, that one is, it's the setup, right? So as that happens, like, what do you think when, like, it's introducing this old man, and you don't quite know who he is yet, and he just goes to the door, and then, like, the reveal that John's friend, his really good friend that sells his wares and stuff, was dealing in serial killer goods. That's a pretty fucked up, like, that's like snuff film dealing or something, It's pretty messed up.
I like how they sort of ease you into it with him going around his house being like, oh, money. Oh, drugs. Okay, all right, money, drugs, weird stuff around here. And then by the end of it, and then, of course, reading through the journal and him being like, oh, yeah, so I got this stuff from this guy, and oh, no, he wants something newer. And John's like, the fuck am I reading? It takes him a minute to be like, oh, no, wait, he really is doing this. Holy shit. It's like, well, my opinion of him just dropped.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, he's been with his friend, or he's known his friend for a long time and never knew that he was dealing in, like, serial killer wares. And not only that, but he's giving, like, victims to the serial killer in order to get, like, fresh crime scenes to get the evidence to sell. So it could be, like, memorabilia.
I don't know which is worse. The getting the memorabilia or the giving of, like, the whole thing is messed up 100%, but it's like, if you had to pick which part of it was the worst, it's probably the giving out of fresh victims in exchange for the pieces. Like, there's one thing about, like, if he's just like, hey, I found this serial killer guy and I got him to, like, trade me fresh pieces, like, that's totally messed up, but it's like the deed is done and you're getting a piece of it afterwards. I'm not condoning it in any way, but I'm like, that's a level of horrible. But the level of horrible above that is the, like, I traded him a new group of people in exchange for that. You're like, oh man, that is worse.
That is way worse. And obviously the Family Man's probably going to kill regardless, but the fact that specific family is dead because of you, maybe he wouldn't have found that family. It would have been someone else, or maybe he would have got caught or something, who knows? But now that you're, like, giving him names, now you're responsible for those specific deaths, which is really creepy to me. And then also that kind of lets we haven't met too many of John's friends other than the ones that are dead, like the ghosts that follow him around. So this is another friend, and he doesn't really have a lot of good friends. I'd say Chaz is probably his most normal friend, right? Yeah. And friend is, they're friends, but
best acquaintance.
Yeah. Best guy he shits on sometimes.
Yeah.
Best Uber driver. That's what Chaz is. but yeah, like this is just another kind of, oh, John hangs out with a lot of terrible people,
Yeah.
or knows a lot of terrible people at least. So,
And he doesn't necessarily know that the people he knows are terrible. Like to an extent, he's like, yeah, he's probably not like he's probably shady. But then to learn more about it to the point where he's just like, oh, I really made a bad call befriending this guy, didn't I? He's actually worse than me.
yeah, yeah, it's like, oh, maybe I didn't know him as good as I thought. Yeah, I'm actually happy he went to fairy tale jail.
Yeah, it was probably a good idea that he got caught and taken away.
Yeah, for sure. And then at the end of that one, you know, he didn't know that the family man was this old nice guy that, or pretending old nice guy that, you know, came to his house. So he ended up giving him the new names on accident. He was like, "Oh, do you need this envelope? Here you go." And it was like, shit. So, but then the funny thing is, we get that cliffhanger, and then it's like, and the next issue, Grant Morrison is writing, and you're like, what the fuck happened? Why are we in this?
Like you left me on like, okay, so we just found out this old dude kills people. Has probably been doing it for a very long time. John's like what am I gonna do? I gotta do something, and then I'm gonna go on vacation, visit my sister,
yeah,
cousin,
or friend. No, it's his friend. It's just a friend. Yeah, she invited him through a letter or whatever, so it was just like a friend.
And you're like, wait, are we going backwards in time? Is this just like a totally unrelated moment happening? Like he did this 2 months ago? Is this the future? Like everything has actually happened and maybe he's going to talk about what happened? It's a pretty jarring jump to like give absolutely no context to why this is suddenly happening when you just set up of him having almost an existential crisis of I just became responsible for killing this family. What am I going to do about it? And then vacation.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing is, I get the idea because they didn't have to even tie it in, because these stories could have been, they could have just cut to them, and then you'd be like, oh, this is a filler issue, and then the same with the second part of it, and then the Neil Gaiman one could also have just been a filler issue, and then they could have just been like, and we're back at regular, you know, Hellblazer time and place or whatever. So they didn't have to, but they went through the effort of going like, man, that was really messed up with the family man, so I got to take a break to get out of town and clear my mind. So like they make it a point to say that. So that's very interesting. And then this is also the first time I think that we know, or that we get, that Hellblazer is actually in real time. Like, meaning there's 3 months that go by in those 3 issues, and that's how long he was out of London, you know, in between issue 24 and 27. So, or 28. And so that's like very, very unusual, is that like normally comic books, you know, Batman started in the 40s or 39 or whatever, and he still looks the same as he's still the same age. So
Yeah.
like people don't normally age with the comic.
Every time they reboot him, he gets younger too. So
Yes, exactly. Or they get, you know, whatever. Yeah, now it's in Smallville and he's a kid or whatever. So
yeah,
John is a very interesting character because he has 300 issues where he ages in real time. So maybe not every issue is a month, but each story arc definitely has time pass in his real life. So I know later on, like we definitely had him celebrate like a 38th birthday or something somewhere in here. And then not in this story arc, but sometime in Jamie Delano's run. And then in Garth Ennis's run later, I know there's an issue that's called 40 because John turns 40 in it. So it's actually like in real time. And that's why at the end of like issue 300, or by the end of issue 300, he was like in his 60s and, you know, getting old. He's still, you know, scrappy or whatever, but
yeah,
they never quite drew him old like that, like old man or anything, but he definitely had more like wear on him as a character by then. So I thought that was cool. I always liked that when I found that out. And this was like the first time I ever heard that mentioned.
if you compared, I'm assuming like his later late 200-y sort of episode or issues to beginning, there would be a difference in that he actually looks aged, I'm assuming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's cool.
Yeah. And it's like a very interesting, it's, like I said, it's just no one's ever does that with regular like characters. Superman, Batman, they're all, you know, too super to stay around and like age. I guess their stories are infinite.
Yeah. Or it's like a special sort of like Elseworlds, a whole separate thing, not part of the main timeline. Or something, a Kingdom Come, where Superman and Batman and everybody is aged up because they went forward like 20-ish years or something, like 20, 30 years.
Exactly. Yeah, and even Swamp Thing. I mean, there's 6 volumes of that, and everyone kind of reboots him in a certain way, you know. So like, but John, you know, there's 300 straight issues, and then when they did reboot him in 2013, he was young again. So they like brought him back to like his 20s or something like that, or like 30. Yeah. So they did that on purpose. Like, we need a young Hellblazer.
Oh.
So, and you know, we'll eventually get there, because even though, so I did read those when they came out, because, but it was right when I stopped buying comics because of money problems. So I was like, okay, well, I'm too poor to buy comics. So, you know, I can't, you know, I did my 300 issue run. I got that at least. And then I just ended up like starting to read those digitally, and then was like, I don't know about this new Constantine. So, but in you know, in completion, for completion's sake, I will, after reading the 300 issues of the normal run, I will definitely dig into those other 2 runs after the new 52. So
Cool.
Yeah, but that's, you know, years away now.
We've got time to get there.
Yeah, we got time, a lot of time. But back to the Family Man. So since he does go on vacation, what did you think about this Grant Morrison comic, or the storyline specifically? Like, well, first off, how familiar are you with Grant Morrison as a writer?
I always knew his name. I'm horrible with names, but I knew his name. I just, like, you could probably tell me what he's written. I'd be like, oh, okay, yeah, I know that. But if you ask me what he's written off the top of my head, I have no clue.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you a couple. He did All-Star Superman with
Oh,
Frank
there you
Quitely.
go. Yeah, okay.
So he works with Frank Quitely a lot, and I know you're not a fan of Frank Quitely's art.
I'm not a super fan of his artwork, no. I love We Three, but that's just because it's, you know, 90% animals. So
Yeah, so he wrote We Three as well. So yeah, he was the writer on that.
I do like his writing. I really do. He is an amazing writer.
Yeah, he's got some. For me, he's very. When he hits, he's very good, and when he misses, I'm like, what is this? It's very weird, like how I can like his. But he's good enough that I will always try his stuff out. But sometimes it does not hit with me at all, and I'm like, what the fuck is this? So, yeah, there's been a couple series where I'm like, I don't understand how this is the same guy that I normally like, but that's, you know, neither here nor there. But
Personal taste. I totally get that.
Exactly, personal taste. But this little story arc of 2 issues, I enjoyed. I thought it was fun. It did remind me a little bit of Fear Machine. I don't know if you got the same feeling.
I think it was, I suppose, yeah, the controlling aspect of it, controlling people subconsciously without them realizing, although it was more them like being, it reminded me a bit of the Sandman issue where they're in the diner and you're just kind of releasing people's inner horribleness, essentially. Like they're taking away their mental controls of like, oh, I shouldn't do that, and just letting them be like, yes, do whatever it is that you're feeling like you wanted to do. You've always wanted to do this. Just go and do it. And yeah, so that idea, that story of just allowing people to just be their ids, I guess you could say, and embrace whatever their darkness, or, you know, the extreme wants that turn out to be darkness inside them, is totally messed up. Like, I loved this story because of how horrible it was.
Yeah, there's some really messed up stuff.
Oh, it was so awful. And yeah,
that first issue, I was like, if you like animals or babies,
yeah,
don't listen to this, maybe.
It's probably a good idea you did that disclaimer, because but that one definitely needed it.
Yeah, I don't always do that. It's kind of hard because with Hellblazer, anything could be triggering. There's a lot of messed up stuff in it. So,
yeah,
you know, if I did that for everyone, it would just, like, everybody.
You just have a list of everything you'd have to go through every
exactly.
time.
It's every time.
If you've hung in this long, you should know that horrible things are going to happen. But just in case you don't know the specific level of horrible, here's a little, just a quick warning that this particular issue is a bit horrible.
Yeah. Well, you know, I think it's because it dealt with like animals and like,
yeah,
and babies.
Yeah.
Specifically, those are pretty hardcore.
That's a specific level of messed up that some people just may not want to see visually. See, and the worst part is, of course, we can't see it, so you then have to describe it for us.
I describe it for you, and you have to picture it in your head. I make you see it.
Yeah.
It's even worse.
Yeah, that is a different level of horrible.
Yeah. But, that's why I was like, okay, we're going to get into some of these topics. And the interesting thing is the first one is crazy violent like that.
Yes.
And there's a lot of messed up stuff. And then the second one, it's just like, oh, yeah, they like fly a plane and drive a car, listen to some music. Like, there wasn't anything that was like super horrible.
It was a good choice to go like way up extreme and then peter down and sort of like, all right, they did these horrible things and now they all died.
Yes. Yeah. And also that town is gone probably. So we don't even have to think about it.
Yeah. That was a good way to do it. Like introduce it with like absolutely horrible, like, up to 10 horrible things are happening. And you're like, oh, is it going to get worse than this? And it's like, no, it's okay. It's okay. We're going to go down a little bit because they've done the horrible things now. And now they're dead. It's done.
It's fine. They're all dead. And then also another one of John's friends who gets left out of the friends who died. She dies. Judith, or no, I can't remember what her name is, but
I forgot it too.
Yeah, she dies. So
Yeah.
Claire, I don't know. Well, something. But so much so that like I don't remember what it is, and I can remember all his other friends because they mention them so often. So she was definitely. This was not considered like in continuity necessarily with the friends that he actually cares about that come to haunt him, even though she died during this. I guess not because of him. So maybe that's why too.
Yeah, it wasn't necessarily his like a direct result of him doing something that caused this. He was just happened to be there.
Not like Richie or or the other people.
He didn't make a conscious choice to be like, so I'm going to pull this plug and then everyone's going to go crazy, sort of thing. Like he didn't necessarily have a hand in it. He was just one of those wrong place, wrong time sort of guys.
Exactly. Yeah. I did notice, I didn't think it was too familiar to the Fear Machine story arc, but I did get hints of it while I was reading it. And I was like, wow, we've only had 2 issues between the Fear Machine and this. And I could definitely see like, oh, this is like a mini Fear Machine story arc. Like this probably would have been better if it was a little bit further away from Fear Machine, but
yeah,
it was still separated enough and it was short enough that it was like, okay, that's fine. But I definitely noticed there was a similarity in it.
Just a smidge, just a little sprinkling of it.
Yeah, I think it's just like the mass control of people.
Yeah,
and like releasing a fear or a want or something inside of them. It was just similar in that way. And then, so at the end of that issue, then you think, oh, okay, now we're gonna go back to London because he gets in the car and he's like going to London.
Nope.
But then he doesn't. Well, he does go to London, but he doesn't go straight back to his friend's house.
Yeah.
And like deal with what he did. So he goes and just starts hanging out. I think he's at like a party or something. And this is the Neil Gaiman issue. And I know you love Neil Gaiman because you love Sandman.
Yes.
So as a Neil Gaiman fan, how high do you rate this issue, like writing wise? Did you think like the story and everything? Did you like it a lot?
I really did like this one. I have a hard time ranking stuff because for me, just about everything Neil Gaiman does is like a 10. So if you tell me like, is it a 10.5 compared to everything else? It's like 10.1 to 10.9. I'd say it's definitely up there with everything else. I did enjoy it.
Well, I know that this issue 27, is like a very rare issue. And I don't know why. I don't know. Maybe because the Family Man story arc paused. Maybe people dropped off or something after the Morrison storyline, because they did like a very big underprinting of this issue. I don't know why, because Sandman is going hard right now, at this time. So you would think that you put Neil Gaiman on it, you would think it would sell, right? But
yeah.
But they did a big underprinting of it. And so it's pretty hard to find. And when you do find it, it's always like over $25. I got it like 20 years ago for $5. So it's like, and that was like, I don't know, $5. But yeah, the cover on this one I like a lot because you get Dave McKean artwork, and
Mm-hmm.
I think this is the first time we've seen him do the covers for this. I'm trying to remember. I can't remember who did the early covers, but I'm pretty sure this is the first time we see Dave McKean do any covers for Hellblazer.
Nice.
But yeah, his art is super interesting. It's all like multimedia and stuff. So
Yeah.
like, he'll do a painting and then he'll put like twigs on top of the painting and then blow smoke and then take a picture of everything all at once. And then that is what the cover looks like. But that's interesting because I don't know. I thought he painted all that when like it wasn't real media. Like I didn't realize there was actual sticks on top of the paintings, or like, you know, I didn't know how he did it.
Yeah, I didn't realize that it was that involved. I knew it was sort of like a mishmash of like some things were painted and some things were like fabric and some things were like just weird knick-knacky things that he would put there. But I didn't realize it was even more pulled back up to like adding even more outside elements. I thought it was say like a static image that had like weird stuff on top of it, and so it would be like a picture of that. But now you're telling me it's even more pulled back of like throwing in other elements of like you say smoke or probably light or just like even more of an expansion than it is just a painting. Was like, wow, that's really cool. I didn't know that part.
Well, even a painting, it's like, wow. But then like you add all that stuff. Like one of the covers he did, I think for Sandman, I saw how he did it. I think it might even be Sandman #1, where there's like text and stuff on the sides.
Yeah.
And all the text is like, well, the actual cover itself, if you bought it, like the original art for it is actually like in a shadow box because there's so much stuff and it's so 3D that the painting is underneath and there's all these 3D pieces above it. And so like if you were going to buy it, it would be like a shadow box that is 3 feet by 5 feet.
Oh, wow.
And it's just full of, it's full of stuff, like
That
full
is
of
so
things he
cool.
glued down, I guess, over the painting. Yeah, it's very interesting. I didn't know that they did that. I just thought, I don't know, because it's computer age that I'm thinking of like, oh yeah, they just took like a picture of a stick and then put it into the computer and then
Like
put it
photoshopping
on
or
top.
something.
Yeah, like Photoshop it. But you still do the photographing of the objects or whatever, but you add them yourself. But this was like, no, he just does it all by hand and then takes a picture of the final product and then that's the cover. They just have to print it in that size.
That is so cool.
It's very interesting.
I knew like half that process. I didn't realize it was even more. Well, that's amazing.
Yeah. But that's just one cool part of this story. Like he does the inside art too, which is kind of unusual for Dave McKean. He doesn't always do interiors.
Oh, I didn't realize he did the inside art too. I thought he just did the cover.
Yeah, he did the inside art.
Oh, cool.
It's very interesting inside art as well. It's a little bit more scratchy, but it works for the story, which is about ghosts and stuff. And this one is so like sad and spooky. It's, the whole idea of like ghosts of homeless people that just want someone to hold them. And people are repulsed because they smell like dead homeless people. And so they try to pull away and they end up getting killed because they don't go for the hug. They pull away, they get frozen or whatever by the touch of the homeless man. It's like, the fuck? Like, super sad.
It's a little bit Christmas Carol, sort of like the idea of like the ghost haunting and just, I mean, obviously not in the same way, but just that idea of it being sort of an intimate story between like people and the ghost that just happens to be there. It's like a very small, tight story, which I think is another thing that makes it so creepy. It's not huge in that it's like, an army of ghosts attacking the city sort of thing. It's like just this one ghost and all he wants is a hug.
Yeah, just give him a hug.
It's so sad.
Yeah. And one other interesting part of this story arc, and I don't know if you caught it, or this issue is, so part of it deals with John going to like a party and meeting a girl, and he thinks he's going to have sex with this girl. And then he realizes, wait a second, aren't you a lesbian? Like, are you a lesbian friend? Like, why are you trying to have sex with me? And it turns out this girl's trying to get John's sperm so that she can have a baby. She's trying to get him to impregnate her. And that was like, wait a second, how many people are trying to get John to impregnate them? Because we got Swamp Thing, we got this lesbian lady. It's like, how many people?
Yeah, that was a pretty funny callback.
Yeah, I guess that happened before this, like just before this. So it was a callback to that probably because Neil Gaiman, I'm sure, read that Rick Veitch stuff where they were where he took, yeah, because that happened in issue 9 of Swamp Thing, right? So, I mean of Hellblazer. So,
because it was after the Demon Blood, which was
yes,
yeah,
that's issue 9. So,
yeah.
so yeah, that's like Neil Gaiman's calling back to that, which I thought was funny. I'm like, how many people want to take John's seed? Like, and why do people think he's a good father? I would not want him as my
Right. Or donor in general, just like a good donor is like, sorry, do you not know about his lifestyle?
Yeah. Also, demon blood. Like, if he ever
Yeah.
gets anyone pregnant, it's like you're part demon. That can't be good for a kid, right? Those lesbians would have had a surprise when they got into their terrible twos, probably.
Oh man, I could only imagine. They definitely dodged a bullet.
Yeah. So, we both really liked this Neil Gaiman issue.
Mhm.
What did you think of these, like, the time away overall? Like, were you okay with it? Did it make you want the Family Man arc more? Like, were you like, ooh, I need to find out what happens, and I like these stories, but I need to get back to the Family Man?
Well, it was strange because you weren't sure, sort of like Fear Machine, like how long was this interlude going to go? How many issues is it going to be before we actually get back to the story? So it's a little bit of trepidation, a little bit of like, okay, so this is the third, issue now that we're okay. So we had a little two-part story. We have this story. It ended, it had an ending. So obviously it's not leading into another half a story. It's like, okay, so is the next issue going to be the start of it again? Is there going to be another tangent? So there was a little bit of, uncertainty with this being a sort of like segue away from the main story. But when it did come back, you're like, oh, okay, it was a short little interlude. That's not so bad. The uncertainty of reading it in the moment when you're like, okay, where's this going? Why are we jumping away from the action that we kind of just had this huge revelation? But then when it does come back, you're like, oh, okay. So that wasn't so bad. Knowing after the fact that you do come back after just 3 issues. But during the moment, it's like these are great stories, but you have in the back of your mind, yes, like I kind of want to get back to the main story. How long is that going to take? How long is that story also going to take? Just the interlude, and then how long is the arc going to be? Because given what we came from, you're like, oh man, are we like taking a break, and then also we have another 7 issues to get through. So
Right. Yeah. Because if the Family Man came back and it was like, and now back to the 12-part story, you're like,
yeah, exactly. Like, why did we have the interlude too? Now this is even longer.
Yes. But yeah, the nice thing is it comes back and it throws you right back into it with him being like, okay, I got to face my problems now. Like, I can't keep running like I was the last 3 issues. So, like, we're jumped right back into it. And then John is on, the hunt and everything. And I liked the back and forth of this because we spent some time with the Family Man himself. And at first, John thinks he's got ahead of the Family Man, like he's on top of it. But the Family Man is actually like way ahead of him. And then once John realizes that, then it switches and the Family Man is actually behind John and John's trying to trick him. So there's a lot of back and forth of each one trying to trick the other and who's got the leg up on the other. And I liked that a lot, the back and forth. What'd you think of that?
Yeah, it was like a great game of cat and mouse where they both think they're the cat and they're both the cat and the mouse at the same time. So it was a very tricky, and I thought it was well written because you could have very easily gotten confused with what was going on, who was where, who was doing what. But the way they paced it and the way they, separated each of their sections to where they weren't really interacting with each other, but they somehow managed to sort of share the same space, which is, city wise, and closing in on each other, where they're both just like, haha, I'm gonna get him. He's like, haha, I'm gonna get him. Oh no, he actually got me.
Yeah, one thing that's interesting about the space thing with like they're both in the same city, but like as an American, I don't know any of the parts of London or like where they are in reference to the others. So I'm always like, okay, now he's saying Liverpool. I don't know how far that is away from his original flat or the area that he goes to sleep with that or to stay with that hooker that he stays with. Like, I don't know where those are in relation to each other. So I'm like, I guess we'll say they're 10 miles away. Each of them are 10 miles away from each other. Like, that's how I think of it in my head.
Sometimes it's a further, it's actually quite a ways away, and then eventually they do get closer. But yeah, it is funny to see sort of like the naming of the distances and cities. I did find it so creepy the way the family man, and I've already forgotten what his real name is, so that's what I'm going to call him.
I don't
But the
remember.
way the way he's able to sort of use his influence as a seemingly upstanding citizen to get information that most people would just offhandedly give to someone like him, like like that's really creepy.
Yeah, him being an old man, he's like, "Will you help me find this address?" Like,
Hmm.
like he can do that, and then also, apparently he was like a PI or something before, so he could talk to the police and kind of get information from them at those local police bars. So, and that's actually something normal.
Yeah, just using his reputation to be able to get almost anything that he wants or needs, and people being none the wiser, just be like, "Oh, I just helped this guy. That's so nice." Sort of the way John was sort of roped into helping him, which is like, "Oh yeah, this old guy just came by for a letter, and he's gonna give my friend a package in return." That's totally normal. That doesn't seem like a horrible thing. And then you realize that you've sort of helped in the murder of somebody without even realizing it is awful. But amazing at the same time. It's like, that's like a worse fear, is to think that something you've done has caused harm to someone else, even if you didn't know that that's what happened. Like that's just a horrible feeling.
You were just a pawn in this game that was started by your friend and
Hmm.
some freak that likes serial killer memorabilia. So,
Oh yeah, and then finding out about that guy. Oh, that guy. Oh, dude, I hated that guy. I hated him worse than the Family Guy, a Family Man. Almost, but
I mean, he's basically the same person, just too scared to do it himself. So he has to like buy these snuff films from other people who can do it or whatever, and like he lives vicariously through them, but he really wants to do it secretly. He just can't do it.
ugh.
So it's weird, but there's something about at least the Family Man does it on his own. Like at
Yeah,
least the Family Man does it himself.
and he's not necessarily doing it to like make money or anything. I'm not saying, again, I'm not saying that I condone what he's
I'm
doing.
not saying I condone what the Family Man did, but at least he did it himself.
And he has a level of like pride, I want to say,
Work
and
ethic.
you know, he keeps to himself. He's not trying to like make money off of it or film or whatever. And the only reason he even did the swapping was so that he could get more victims. So it wasn't even like, I'm trying to make money off this. It's his own personal vendetta against people that he just loves or hates. I still never quite figured out his exact, reasoning behind why he killed people.
Yeah. Well, I think the big revelation at the end of this, that like the whole time I kind of was reminded of like Rorschach's from The Watchmen, like where his storyline is like he sees his mom and his mom's like a prostitute and she's having sex with someone or whatever, and that kind of messes Rorschach up. And I thought that's what this was like too. Like, oh, he saw his mom and she was a prostitute, but then at the end you find out that his mom and his dad were they were the ones in the bed together, so she wasn't sleeping with anybody, and he just was like, "You came home late. I was scared."
You promised that you wouldn't. You said like what was it, like cross my hopes to die. We'll be home before midnight or whatever. Like we promise, and he's just like, well, you broke your promise, so you die. And it's just a black and white way he sees the world. But there was also that undertone of like love that I didn't quite grasp. That it just seemed like such a what do you call it? Just such a weird idea, in that he kills people because he he loves them, or like they're the expression of love that they have for each other sickens him so much that he kills them, and then like places them lovingly with each other, like with that first family that he killed, like the husband.
I was thinking of it maybe like he kills them when they're still in their loving moments. So if he kills them now, it preserves that love, and they don't get a chance to like have the love curdle or whatever, later on. So like if it's a happy family,
Because like with the dog, right? Because when his dad killed the dog, he said you kill them with love because you don't want them to suffer. And so I'm assuming he just extrapolated from that, like, oh, if I kill them at the perfect moment of love that they're in, their love will never wither and die. They'll never grow apart. They'll be perfectly preserved like that forever, maybe.
That's what I get. It's that's close. It is kind of like a lot of things that Jamie Delano writes in this. They're like really good ideas, and sometimes they don't fully like click at the end, but they're such good ideas that I'm like on board. like I didn't quite understand his motivations, but I got it. I could kind of feel the edges of it, I understood what he was going for. I'm not sure if he fully pulled it off, but I like what I read. That's kind of how I feel about a lot of his stuff. Because he's written a lot more than just Hellblazer, and usually I have that feeling about his writing where I'm like, there were some really cool things in this, and I like what he was doing, but like sometimes it just doesn't click 100% with me. So, or like it doesn't all come together at the end nicely sometimes. But that's what he likes to write apparently, because he writes a lot of stuff like that. But maybe he likes leaving the reader with like some questioning thing in the back of their head or whatnot.
I suppose it's good to have it be kind of a gray area, because then people talk about it and try to figure it out themselves, instead of it being a black and white sort of like he kills people just because he wants to, or because he was disappointed as a child, or his parents didn't keep his promise, so they killed him. And that's what I thought originally. I thought it was because his parents didn't keep the promise of being home on time. He was like, well, I'm a stickler for the rules, and so I killed you.
Yeah.
But then
they do mention that, but
yeah, but then it still seems to be sort of an evolution of that, plus, I guess since he was disappointed and he loved his parents so much, he didn't like the idea that they could disappoint him. So if he killed them now, they'll never disappoint him again, and he preserves their love for him and him for them forever. And then I guess that just expands into strangers for some reason.
Sure. He's a sociopath, so yeah, just moves in that way, I guess. But yeah, and another relationship in this story arc is John's dad is in it, and we don't really know that much about his dad other than him and his dad don't get along. And so it's really crazy that the first time we meet John's dad is when the family man comes to visit him and murders him. So it's like, oh shit.
Yeah, that kind of came out of nowhere.
Yeah. And one thing that's kind of different probably than other comics is if you're going to introduce an important character in your main character's life, like someone's dad or mother or whatever, you usually don't murder them on the first time you meet them. And then also usually the hero of the book is going to save them. So like if Ma Kent is going to die on the farm, Superman will find a way to make that not happen in those pages. But in this, nah, his dad gets killed and he's like, well, I don't, sorry, Dad, I'm sad now. In fact, he doesn't even know about it for like 3 issues. So so when he finds out, he's like, oh my God, and the interesting thing is that it's very realistic the way that he reacts, because he's super torn up and sad about it, but also we know that he didn't like his dad. And we hear from his dad how much they kind of had a bad relationship or a strained relationship. So, I've had people die in my life that I loved and was sad about them dying, but then at the same time, I have this weird feeling because when they were alive, we had issues, So it's like I could totally relate to that part of this story, and I don't know. It's also probably because that person is his dad, right? It's like his mom died when he was a kid, so John only had his dad to look up to or have as a figure of a parental figure. And so I don't know, to me I was surprised just that they would kill off like his dad, and then John doesn't even think about using magic to bring him back, which is very uncharacteristic of a superhero book, right?
Where like sometimes with his other friends, he would be thinking like, oh, is there any way that I can change this? Is there any way that I can like help or undo this? And when he hears that his dad's dead, he's just like, oh.
Yeah, there's no thought. Well, that might also be because he doesn't like his dad that much, but there's no thought of like, maybe I can, get some magic scroll or some shit. There's none of that. It's just like, oh man, dad's dead and was murdered by this guy. It's more of like, now he's feared for his life because the family man is close to him, like, and found out enough that he knew who his dad was. So he's got to watch his back. And that's kind of, he doesn't even think about bringing his dad back. So, and that leads me to the ending of this story arc, which is, so John is so freaked out that he gets a gun, which he said multiple times he does not like guns and does not want to use them. And I will go on record saying, if you're not a fan of guns, you probably shouldn't grab one just when you need it, like in one moment, and you've never shot one before, and you're like, I'm going to kill someone with this. Because I could have seen this arc, like, if he really wanted to put that whole, like, guns are bad thing in this, like, he could have made it so the gun don't work. You know, like the gun doesn't work when it's supposed to.
Or he might have accidentally shot somebody else, or
yeah, something like that.
Yeah, or just messed it up somehow.
Yeah, I thought maybe that was going to happen because John is
shoot himself on accident.
yeah, I could totally see that happening. But I was surprised that it actually worked like it was supposed to and went off and, you know, was able to kill the family man. But then, what did you think about the whole the idea that he put forth of, even though this man is a serial killer, John did not want to kill him at the end, right? Like, he was forced to kill him in the middle of the fight, but like, he went into the battle being like, I'm gonna kill him, and then as it got there, he's like, I can't do it. And like, I don't know, for me, I'm like, hey, he's a serial killer, like, go for it. But the idea that, like, even any life is worth something, you know, like, shouldn't be murdered, even the life of a serial killer who's active, you know, maybe it would be one thing if the serial killer who isn't active and he's 80 years old now, and and we found out 20 years after his last murder that he was the murderer. Okay, like, you know, I get being sympathetic a little bit or whatever.
Killing him now wouldn't undo what he's done. Like, what would you really kill him now? Sort of idea.
Yeah, but like, if he was in his prime, you know, like, yeah, let's stop this fucker. Like, I don't know what the argument is there, but he felt it. He felt bad about it, I guess. So, but that's weird also because sometimes the characterization doesn't fully fit other things we've seen. Like,
yeah, like, he really had no qualms about people dying or like, he literally killed his friends.
He's killed 2 friends in this book. And Zed. With Zed, he's like, I'm going to sleep with you and ruin, like, you might be killed by this angel. I don't know. But we need to stop this whole, you know, God angel thing happening with the new Mary. So, sorry, I had sex with you.
It seemed like he had some qualms about hurting and or killing his friends. Like, he's like, oh man, like, this kind of sucks, but I'm going to do it anyway. You know, I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to see this through to the end. And his hesitation to kill, 1, a guy who murdered his dad, 2, has murdered probably hundreds of people, and 3, will go on to murder more people, that and 4 is not his friend, is a stranger essentially that he just happened to bump into and is now in the position to end his, you know, quiet but real reign of terror. It is a little weird that he hesitates as much as he does.
The only thing I could think is, after the Fear Machine story arc, he is a changed man. That, you know, like, there is personal growth that the character does go through that they reference later on. And so, like, maybe that was John before, like, he, in the first couple issues of Hellblazer, he's, you know, his friend Gary Lester, he sacrifices him to Namoth, the god or whatever.
And
it
sucked, but he was still like, I'm going to do this. Like, we got to see this through.
But maybe he's sick of that so much now, and he's gone through so much, like, after the Fear Machine story arc, that he's like, okay, I don't think I can deal with this anymore. They don't say that specifically, but I could see that being what he's thinking as he's writing this arc.
Maybe there's a difference between an immediate thing that he knows if he stops this, he saves the city, versus, you know, this guy could trip and fall and break his neck because he's old, like, tomorrow. Or maybe he'll just stop killing and retire, like you said. You know, maybe he'll be like, after he kills me, he'll be done. And, you know, therefore I can sacrifice myself as his last victim. And then, you know, everything's over with. But the idea that he could kill this guy, not knowing the future consequences of, like, has he really saved anybody? Or did he just take a life on purpose for revenge, essentially? And so that could be another layer of his hesitation of, you know, it's not him saving the world necessarily. It's him killing a man with the hopes that it does, do better, but still he has to make the physical act of killing him, because he did kind of get like Papa Midnight to help with Gary Lester. He did kind of get the other friends to help him with the fear machine, where all he did was have sex, really. So, like, like that, I don't think was as hard of a choice in that storyline of like how to help necessarily, or how to play his part. But in this one, it was like, no, you have to make a direct choice, because if he tries to tell anybody, who's going to believe him? If he tries to, somehow like breadcrumbs, like, oh, like lead people, like, somehow, I don't know, videotape him murdering somebody, and then be like, I got you on camera, and then like get him put away in jail. It's like, no, he's got to make the decision to stop this guy. It is a little weird that he decides to go with a gun instead of, I don't know, magic, or
Right,
maybe
yeah.
something a little less.
He could have called, like, he could have opened a doorway to hell and pushed him in or something. You know what I mean?
He could have been like, "Hey, demon, I got a soul for you," or something like, that broker soul guy that is always like, "I'll get you, John Constantine." He'd be like, "Hey, by the way, here's a peace offering," or something. But the fact that his first thought is gun is a little weird, especially for someone who's never used a gun. Like, that would be like, I wouldn't automatically go, I should get a gun when I have fired a gun once on a range and years ago. And if you were to tell me like now, hey, get a gun and kill someone, I'd be like, well, first off, no, I'm not gonna kill somebody, but like, I don't know how to use a gun. So it's just a weird thought to be like his first, instinct, or whatever you want to call it, is like, yeah, I should get a gun, and like not figure out how to use it, but just have it in case.
Well, the funny thing also is it's not necessarily his first instinct, because if you remember at the end of issue 2, I think, of the Family Man story arc, he grabs a bread knife and like does practice stabs.
Oh, right. See, I wasn't taking that seriously. I thought he was just sort of like acting out an initial thought of like, he killed my dad, so I'm going to kill him. And he just grabbed whatever was near.
I think it was him practice stabbing, like, is this going to work? And then he's like, nah, I need a gun. So
I didn't take that seriously. I thought it was him just acting out some sort of inner rage of like, this, I'm going to kill him, knife, like fake stabbing or whatever. I thought it was just him just expressing some anger, and him. I didn't really think he was like, I'm going to use this literal bread knife to like find him and like kill him by stabbing him to death. I thought it was him expressing his anger and then being like, I have to find a way to kill him with a gun. So I probably misread that. I totally was thinking of it as more of just like an expression of anger.
Yes. Yeah, I think he was literally serious about using a bread knife, which probably wouldn't have worked anyway very well. And then he's like, I'm, knife work is up close and messy. I should just get a gun because that's easier. But, I'm sure in England it's not very easy to get a gun. He obviously knows people in the underworld. So, but yeah, I just thought that was interesting that he goes for a gun, like you said, instead of using spells or something like that. But I guess because it's not a supernatural being, he doesn't automatically go to supernatural for the fix, right? Like he just sticks with the physical world. And it also creates like an interesting storyline because we get to see him do it with his hands. And that's also why I think another layer of why it's so hard for him to do it is because, like you were saying, he's got to get his hands dirty with this. Like with Gary Lester, it was, one, Gary did it to himself and he was already, going to cause all this other havoc going on in New York. And then 2, Papa Midnight was there to help him do it. So it was kind of like, it wasn't the blood wasn't on his hands necessarily, all the way at least. And then the same with, what's his name? Richie, the computer guy. It's like, well, he was in the computer and this happened. And I'm actually just putting him out of his misery. I'm not murdering him. I'm just going to make him go to sleep because his body's already dead. Like, so there's a little bit of separation there as well. And then, but this is like straight, like I have to physically pull a trigger and murder this guy. So I guess I get why he's a little bit more hesitant on that. I guess morally, but
I guess we're a little harsh on him. With everything he's been through, we should cut him some slack a little bit with the fact that he does have a moral quandary about this.
That's true. I just, I'm not used to him having morals. So
yeah, it's a little weird. It felt out of character, but as we've talked about it, it does make sense that he would have hesitation about doing it himself and the fact that he has to do it at all.
Yeah, well, and that's also like this is the early issues of this series, right? So every one of these story arcs is developing a different part of him that you didn't know about. Like, so this is kind of like, okay, we can see like where he's coming from on this after we talk about it for a bit. And so it is like establishing these different facets of his personality or moral system that we didn't know before. So it makes sense that we would maybe miss it. But also, like I said, Jamie Delano kind of hides his meanings and stuff sometimes, or like exactly what he's trying to say doesn't always get conveyed perfectly. So maybe that's part of it too.
I'm actually surprised he didn't have Chaz do it.
Yeah, right. Chaz could have done it because he's in the story, so they could have totally done that. But
I love the way they did like sort of work out their plan, and that it did work to an extent of like throwing him off of like, oh, so he knows I'm probably staying with Chaz, so Chaz will have me kicked out. I'll go stay with his cousin, the prostitute, and then fake him out with when I'm gonna get up and get on a train. All that whole story of the way they set their trap was brilliant. I mean, that was brilliant. And that Chaz,
my favorite part of that is when, oh, sorry, go.
over that Chaz followed the family man back to the hotel and like told John everything that he saw so that he would be ready to take him on. But still, the fact that was the extent of Chaz's,
I mean, Chaz could have hit him with the car, right? Like that could have
Yeah.
been how they killed him. Like just drive over the old man. He can't run away from a car. So
he has a box of donuts and he's just, standing in a stoplight and just bam, hits him.
exactly, not paying attention. But yeah, my favorite part of that little section is the fact that John's like, I can't have sex with you, prostitute friend of Chaz's, and then he's like, he wakes up, he's like, actually, let's have sex. Like, never mind, I changed my mind. Like, and then it makes him wake up later than he wanted. So like, it's like, John, your life's on the line, man. Think with your big head, not your little one.
But he has needs, and he's so stressed out. He's got to, clear his mind. Apparently, that's the best way he can think to do it. Literally to do it.
Exactly. So yeah, once John kills him, and the family man's dead, and then issue 31, which is one of my favorite issues of this early Jamie Delano run, is the morning. It's called The Morning of the Magician, and it's about him putting his dad to rest. And you get to see his whole family. So, we've seen Cheryl, his sister, and her husband before, and also his niece, Gemma. But she was pretty young. And this whole storyline, this issue, I was like, wow, that's a really like creepy way to get to know the family, is through the ghost of the dad haunting the daughter. And you're like, why is he haunting Gemma? We don't know, But when you find out why, like, I don't know, it's super hardcore. It made me think, like, okay, so that's where John's morals were when he was a teenager. He's willing to curse his dad with, like, magic that he doesn't quite understand how bad it's going to be. And then when he does, he's like, oh, shit, I got to tie your soul to this dead cat, so I got to put it in formaldehyde so it won't rot and you won't die. It's like, Jesus Christ, like, that's super fucked up. And then the fact that, like, the dad couldn't be in peace and couldn't leave. Like his soul couldn't, because John did that at a very young age. And then you'd think John would have taken care of that before, because his dad's been in bad health, right?
Yeah, the fact that it took his dad dying to remember that he had done that was kind of like, you think that'd be something important he would have known about before this.
Yeah, it would have been like, oh yeah, maybe like my dad, I can see he's sick whenever I see him or whatever. And maybe he doesn't see him often enough. Maybe that's why. But, if he keeps like dying or like getting sicker and sicker, it's just barely preserving him, right? Like the formaldehyde on that cat that his soul is tied to is barely preserved in that formaldehyde. I mean, he's still feeling gross and horrible. So you think he'd be like, yeah, I need to like tell my dad, or I need to like fix my dad and I'll figure out how to do that. But I think the issue was, and I mean, maybe later on when he's older now, like he could have figured out a way to break the curse. But the way they made it seem like in the issue was the curse is there until the cat is dead or the cat's body is gone. And once the cat's body is gone, it's tied to his dad like that. So if he tried to like burn it early, it would have just burned his dad's body up, right?
Yeah, I hadn't thought of it that way. Oh, that's an interesting point.
Yeah, so when his dad is dead now, he can burn the cat, and then that will release the soul because the body is officially dead then, right? Like any life force left over. But I like that one a lot. It's very like messed up to see. It's like one of the first flashbacks we get of John's like history, and then I think it actually is the first one. I think I can't think of another time before this where you flash back to John as a kid.
No, because before it was just when he was what was he was in his 20s,
Oh,
right? When the
Newcastle, right?
whole
Yeah.
that was still like later
But
early.
that was after he was out of his dad's house and whatnot. This was like him 15 or something.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think this is the first time you see a snippet of his child or early teens, mid-teens era life.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to see him younger and like less responsible as like a magician who's like just getting whatever he can get his hands on magic wise and like just doing it to see what happens. And he's willing to like do that to his dad, even if his dad is terrible. Doing that to someone you know or love is like pretty fucked up.
Yeah, that was pretty messed up. I also think that if it had it well, and maybe this is him also potentially having some morals, but if the grandfather hadn't been haunting Gemma, would he have bothered to free his soul?
Oh, that's true too. I didn't even think about that.
Because the fact that he was haunting Gemma, I think, was the reason he was like, oh man, this is actually horrible that I let him, stay connected to that cat for so long and totally forgot about it. But if he had just been a wandering spirit, not haunting Gemma or like anybody, if he'd just been wandering around, would he have remembered or cared to release
Right.
him?
Probably not. That could have been a future storyline maybe where his dad's like, I've been here for so long.
Yeah.
But like,
Or if he would have just joined, John's other ghost friends and just been hanging around. And he might not have remembered. He might have been just like, oh, fuck. Well, he's just like my other friends who are just hanging around and not remembered the cat either. But I think it was specifically the fact that the dad was haunting Gemma is what I think sparked his memory and his choice to free his dad.
yeah, and that makes sense because Gemma and his sister Cheryl are the only two people that John really cares about in life for the most part. I mean, he cares about Chaz, but is very guarded. Like he's got like that bro love for Chaz, where he doesn't ever say it, but then in little moments he's like, "I love you, man." Like, so there's that.
Sorry, I screwed you over and made you like sell your cab because I said the apocalypse was coming. That
Yeah,
was my bad.
that one's on me. That one is on me.
But still,
But
you were the one who believed me, and you should have known better.
yeah. So with this last issue, do you think that it added a lot to the Family Man story arc to have this weird epilogue, death of the grandpa issue?
I thought it was actually a nice end cap to it because the ending of the Family Man arc with him dying, with him sort of being in that place of I literally just murdered somebody. I kind of liked having a little afterthought of him processing everything because he didn't really get to process his dad's death through the actual fighting of fighting, evading the Family Man. So giving us that little after bit, that little bit of oh, we get to find a little bit more of his childhood. He gets to interact with Jim and his sister again, and sort of giving his dad some peace, which is probably not something he would have ever thought to do, but still ended up doing. I liked that they added on that little bit of closure because you could have just ended it.
Right. Yeah, they could have just started whatever next story arc right after and be like, okay, I guess, his dad died and whatever.
Yeah, but this was a nice way to, like you said, give it an epilogue, give us a
Yeah.
little more.
It took
And it
time.
was, yeah, it wasn't necessary, but I am really grateful that they did do that and they chose to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I like it as well. I think it's a very good way to like end cap this story, especially because it is such an important thing in John's life with it's his dad being killed. So, they reference that many times in the future. So it makes sense that they would, or it's good that they, you know, like hit this little end cap with it because it means a lot in the storyline. So even if it doesn't necessarily mean as much to John, like the death of his dad, it still has resonance in the rest of the story throughout the 300 issues. So, I think it was a good call. I don't know if he knew that was going to happen, but it was a good call to like spend time with this little last issue. But with issue 31, that is the end of our talking about these issues. And you kind of already said this, and I already think I know the answer, but what would you rate the arcs so far? We have the Family Man, the Fear Machine, and Original Sins. What's the order you would rate them as from best to worst?
Well, I think this is my new favorite, just having gone through it and the roller coaster that it kind of provides you with, like his moral quandary, with the introduction of the family man being this, like, oh, just an old dude. Probably, like, you would be like, oh, it kind of reminds me of my grandpa or, my elderly neighbor or something. And then you find out he's actually this, like, sadistic killer. And you're like, holy shit. Like, that already was a twist that I never would have seen coming. And I don't know of anyone who would have seen that coming, just because it's not the typical sort of serial killer who's always like some young 20 something, like with a zest for life and like, I can't wait to do some more killing sort of character. But just that twist of who the antagonist would be, and that it was with the even with the side note of the 3 issues, was still a short arc, which was great. So I think this one is my first favorite now. Original Sins is either tied or just below it, because it is a little bit shorter.
Yeah, and it's like multiple issues that are like their own single stories, some of them. So
Yeah, and it was really cool, but it's also an epic like story because it involves the city and it involves like hundreds of people all being infested by the demon, and it's a much bigger story. But this was a much more intimate story that involved just a handful of people and really focused on John having to make these choices, and then of course Fear Machines down there.
yeah, well, we only have one more arc left in Jamie Delano's run, which is issues 32 through 40. So we'll hit that. We'll do a Hell Talk episode on that once it's over, and we'll talk about Jamie Delano as a writer in the last arc and all that. But yeah. So is there anything I missed or anything that you wanted to bring up specifically?
Actually, I was just thinking about the fact that at the end of the issue, when he has shot the Family Man and the Family Man's lying there dying, and he's like, "If you loved me, you would kill me." Sort of a weird way to put it, but I think that was the gist of what he was saying. And John does like end his life. Would you have done the same thing, knowing what this guy has done, knowing that he killed your father, that he would probably go, he tried to kill you, he would go on to kill other people? Would you give him that mercy of killing him quickly, or him obviously having a gut shot, it would take a bit for him to die? Would you have, like, maybe just walked away and let him suffer?
I would have, only because then I would be sure that he was dead. Like
That is true.
if you leave him in a field, maybe he gets away and you have to deal with him later again. I've watched too many movies where that happens, like Red Dragon or something. Where like you think he's dead and then he's not.
Don't double tap, huh?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you got to double tap. So, there's too many movies where that happens. So yeah, for sure. If I knew this, I don't consider it a mercy. Either way, you're dead. I don't really care if it takes you that long to get there or not. I just want you out of my life and not have to think about you anymore. So that's if I was John killing the Family Man, not
Right.
in reality. I'm not.
Not in general. Like, I'm not asking you a general question of like, so you
Yeah.
just shot this guy, man.
Yeah. Here's a moral question for you, Matt.
Yeah.
So you murdered someone.
Yeah. In the basis of the story, I don't know. I think I would have wanted to know more about the old man. Like, if obviously he's suffering and dying at this point, but I would have still wanted to know like why. A few more whys. I'd be like, hey, with your last breath, tell me why. Like, tell me more of the, like, why were you killing people? Like, why did you kill him? I mean, obviously he knows why he killed his dad, it's getting him, but still, like, the why. I would have wanted to know a bit more information.
Yeah, I feel like the Family Man wouldn't even give him that. So I mean, he could ask, but I doubt he would get that, and then it would just be like, okay, well then I'm gonna kill you. So, like, to me, there's not even a point, because, like, at some point, some of those serial killers and stuff, most of them are just doing it for compulsion reason, right? Like they have a need or an urge to kill. So I feel like that's what it was with him too. So maybe there isn't even a why at that point, other than genetically I'm fucked up or something. But Yeah, interesting. It is interesting to think about. Like he could have gone a certain way with it, and he didn't. Um,
I mean, obviously, it would have taken more panels to go through that, and they just needed like a quick, clean ending for it. But in the sense of like in that moment, I would have wanted to at least ask, even if you didn't answer. I would have wanted to ask a question of maybe in his last moments he would have wanted to confess or something, or at least uh, say something. What would his final words be? But yeah, I was just curious. That was just my thought. I also wanted to know what your favorite cover was of this particular arc.
oh, my favorite cover is issue 31. Actually, it's a tie. It's issue 31 and issue 27. So 31 is the morning of the magician. So the cover of that one is his dad's body that's been all cut up and like his arm is missing from the family man murdering him, and it's all creepy and pale looking, and it's like hauntingly standing in front of what looks like a bed or like a crib or something. And so it's just really creepy, and I love the way it looks. It's very striking. And then the Hold Me one, which is the Neil Gaiman issue, is issue 27. That one, it's I don't know, it's also haunting, and there's a little. It's just they both have similar like creepy factors in them, and I just think those are the ones that stand out the most to me out of the ones in this arc.
Yeah, that was my favorite too. The Neil Gaiman, Dave McKean cover as well, because it was so simple but so striking at the same time.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, these early covers, they really, with the Vertigo titles, they were like, we're going to do something different. We're not going to have like hero poses on the cover, but the way that they do them still is just as intriguing to me, or even more so intriguing, because you see, how many times you see Superman on the front flying forward with his fist in the air or whatever. It's like, okay, we get it. Or punching someone near laser vision or something. So it's like, yeah, we get it. They fight. But all of these are like way esoteric or just little things from the background of each issue, and they put them on the cover. And yeah, they do a really good job of still making it intriguing and very artistic. So you're like, oh, this is like weird and like spooky, it's like unsettling.
I also liked the one for the first for 23 with the sort of stories at the bottom, and just the makeup of that cover was really cool too, because it really, like, at first you're like, what is this gibberish? Like, I don't understand what this has to do. But then obviously it leads into it being about fairy tales and fairy tale characters. So I like the idea that a lot of times the cover is like, what is this? What does this have to do with the story? Then you're like, oh no, this is actually what the story is. And I guess over time you start to realize, okay, I have to look at the cover and sort of try and see if I can figure out what the story is going to be about, because the story is there in the cover, but it still doesn't give away the story necessarily. It just gives
Not
you
at
kind
all.
of a hint of what.
Yeah, they
what
just
it,
drop little
what it
hints.
might be. Yeah.
It just drops little hints of what's in the story. Like I said, they'll have, like in the last issue of the Family Man arc where the gun is involved, it's like, okay, there's a gun, and then there's like a doll in the background, and then there's like so it's like, oh, you get, once you read the story, like, oh, I understand what all these references are to on the cover. But before that, you're just kind of like, what the fuck is all this shit? It's like a collage.
It's just intriguing, and you have no idea what any of it actually means until you get to, you actually read the story and you're like, oh, that was brilliant, the way they just like wove everything together in this weird picture that doesn't give anything away but also gives everything away.
Yes, if you've read it, and if you haven't, then you don't. So that's kind of an interesting cover. I like the way that Vertigo does their covers like that, and Sandman has a lot of covers like that too, because Dave McKean did all those covers, and it's very interesting.
I love those. Don't ask me what my favorite is of those, because I can't pick.
All of them.
They're all 10.
Yeah. So yeah, is there anything else you want to talk about?
Actually, was something I've been thinking about for a while, but I keep forgetting to ask since I've had the opportunity to ask you until so now I'm finally going to ask it. But so I know when you started the main podcast, it was mostly just kind of focusing on almost anything that you guys were interested in, but then you decided to do these individual specific minis of, first Swamp Thing and then Hellblazer. Like, what made you decide to branch off that way? I mean, you could have just kept doing, the regular podcast and talking about just individual trades, or first first trades, or random stories. But why specifically did you go off on these sort of like extremely long tangents, I guess you could say.
Yeah, you could say that. Well, so I think it just started because I wanted to read every issue of Swamp Thing and Hellblazer, and I've read a lot of Hellblazer. So I think out of the whole run of 300 issues, there's only two runs of it, maybe like 50 issues total that I haven't read. So I've read a majority of Hellblazer, but I do know that it's kind of daunting because it's 300 issues. And I thought, okay, like if I do this and I record it, then people can hear it, and more people will get into Hellblazer, and that's kind of what I want. I want this character to be, I love this character, and I want to share that love with everybody. And then the Swamp Thing one's the same thing, except I hadn't read most of that. So I think I'd only read the Neil Gaiman run. I'm not sorry, the Alan Moore run of Swamp Thing. And so I was like, well, I want to read it, and I might as well just read it with everybody and see how it goes. So I did Swamp Thing first because I was listening to Kevin Smith has a podcast called Fat Man on Batman, or it was called Fat Man on Batman. And yeah. And one of the early, like, I think it's like issue or episode 40 or 50, he just decided one time, because normally he would like interview people. And so it was just him interviewing people that had to do with Batman, like people from the animated series or whatever. And I guess he like didn't have someone to interview one week. So he's like, you know what, I'm going to read an episode or an issue of Swamp Thing that I love that has Batman in it. And he read it like me talking to you, like describing every panel and what's going on in it. So I loved that. I thought it was awesome, but it was Kevin Smith doing it, so it was like 4 hours long. So, because he goes on tangents or whatever. And
yeah.
But I loved that he did that. And then also it reminded me of a podcast, and this is crazy because I kind of can't believe podcasts are this old, but I used to listen to a podcast in 2008 called Tom versus the Flash. I think it's called Tom versus Comics now. And it's not, he doesn't make them anymore, but he still has it up so you can listen to it if you want. But basically this guy named Tom went back and was doing a blog for every issue of, I think it was Justice League at first, and then it was the Flash. So he then turned it into a podcast, and like starting from some issue of the Flash, I think it's like Flash 120 or something. He started from there with the podcast and was like, all right. And then he just like talked about each issue, talked about, the funny stuff, what happens in it. And it was like little 10-minute episodes. And I loved it. I was like, oh, this is great. I get to learn Flash history and I don't have to track down these old issues. And so from those two things, I was like, oh yeah, I want to do that, but for characters I like. So instead of doing the Flash or Superman or whatever, I was like, okay, I'm going to do Swamp Thing first. And then that was going well, and I was enjoying that. So then I was like, well, I'm going to do Hellblazer, especially since in Swamp Thing, like they tie in when Hellblazer gets his own series. So I could do like, actually in tandem reading and see where they connect. Kind of like with Buffy and Angel, if you watch Buffy the Vampire Slayer and then you watch Angel and you can, interweave them as they go.
Yeah. They can go back and forth and they actually match up if you watch them right.
Yeah. It kind of gives it like an interesting story, together, and see where they match up, like you said. So I was like, oh, since I'm coming on that issue, I might as well start the Hellblazer podcast when that happens. So I did that. And yeah, I just think it was just like a fun thing. I just want to share these characters with people. And a lot of people don't have time to read or find comics, and especially people who maybe watch the movie and don't really have an interest in getting into the hobby of comics, which is a whole thing, right? You got to collect, you got to know where to look for them, and it's expensive. And then, so if you could just go on Spotify and be like, I want to learn a little bit about Hellblazer or Constantine, and you find my podcast, then we can go through the whole storyline of all 300 issues, and you can listen to it in your car when you're driving or, whatnot. And so he could become your favorite comic book character even without you having to read the comics necessarily. Now, I love comics, and I would love it if people would be like, well, now I got to buy this stuff because it's so awesome. But, I'm realistic. Most people don't have time to sit down like I do. Actually, I don't have time either, but I still force myself to read all this stuff. And because I enjoy it so much and I want to like share that with everybody. So that's kind of why I got into doing this. And that's how I came up with the, like, I'm going to read specific characters. But yeah, is there anything else?
That's so cool. If you hadn't, if say the stories hadn't aligned the way they did with Swamp Thing and Hellblazer, would you have done them simultaneously the way you're doing them now if they didn't have
No,
that connection?
for sure not. For sure not. It's a lot of work to do both. They and they don't click together enough to really make it matter either. So like at the beginning there was a lot more weaving of the characters, and now there's not so much.
They kind of went their separate ways a little bit.
Yeah, but it is fun seeing them like it's fun reading them when they were coming out in real time. So you can see like in the 90s they have this same feel, and that kind of makes them like you can see how they were together even if they're not tied in together. You get like, oh, they're still talking about the same issues that both are talking about in the 90s.
The throwbacks or the mentions.
Yeah, so you get all those little Easter eggs, we'll call them. So it's still fun to read them together. But doing the podcast and then the main podcast I do too it's a lot of work. But it is fun, and I love going through it like with you, meeting you and having you be able to talk to you about, Hellblazer is like the thing I wanted, right? Like I want to talk about these characters with people that didn't know about them before. So you're like my success story.
It's been so great because I've loved all, like you said, the Easter eggs that have popped up in Swamp Thing and Hellblazer. Like the tiniest mention of the cereal convention, which was in Sandman, and that the Family Man was invited. It's been a while since I read it, but I think they mentioned his name in that actual issue, where they're like, "Oh, the Family Man didn't show up," and it's a completely throwaway line, like it is in here, where they just mention, "Oh, you've been invited to attend the first serial killers convention," which I loved. In Sandman, they spelt it cereal as in like breakfast cereal, just to cover their tracks, which I thought was perfect. But just a little tidbit like that, I was like, "Oh my gosh, they're talking about the convention that was in Sandman. That's so cool!" Because of course he's a serial killer, he would be invited, and so like little things like that, which I would never have known about any of these connections. I'm in love with the fact that they're all connected. Someday I will probably get all of not the issues of Hellblazer. I'm not an issue collector, but I would love the trades. Yes, someday when I have the room.
The new trades that they printed actually have every issue, I believe, in them. So like they collect like everything, which is very cool. Some of them are out of print now, but I'm sure they'll put them back in print at some point in time. So
yeah, I would love to get the trades someday.
I'm really glad that you dig Hellblazer just from the podcast. So
oh yeah, no, I'm so glad that you. Well, that's why I was curious, because if you had just never decided to do these specific podcasts, Swamp Thing and Hellblazer, I wouldn't have known anything about these characters beyond what I did know, because I would have never thought to research it on my own. So the fact that you took the time to go through all of these characters and are continually taking the time to go through everything is amazing, because I'm probably not going to get the Swamp Thing issue just because it's a little daunting with how many there are.
Yeah, there's a lot.
But Hellblazer, I think, is attainable. So I will probably go that direction someday, just so I can have, that next to my Sandman collection.
The nice thing about Hellblazer, I'll say this, if you wanted to get the issues, there are no, at least of right now, there's no like first appearance of anybody in them, because John's first appearance is in Swamp Thing.
Right.
So the first issue of Hellblazer isn't really worth that much, or it's not priced up that much, right? So like if you wanted to get it, you could probably find a copy for like $10 on eBay. I'd say the hardest one to find is that Neil Gaiman one. So, and it's not hard to find; it's just more expensive.
Yeah, that for that alone, I would probably get the trade just so I have it collected with all those together. If I were to get individual issues, they probably would be those ones that have connections to either Neil Gaiman or characters like Matthew the Raven or something like that, because there are some of those in Swamp Thing, and those would probably be the only issues I personally would nab just to sort of add to my Sandman collection. But overall, I am in love with this series and the way you're going through it. I do appreciate the time and effort that you're putting into this, and I really hope that more people, will search or who are just curious will find these, come across them, whatever issue we happen to be on, and then be like, "Oh, this is really interesting. let me go back and see, because I don't have to go out and buy it. I can sit down and listen to it whenever. I personally like to listen when I'm like doing chores, dishes, or whatever, because it helps pass the time.
Yeah, I usually listen to podcasts when I drive and stuff. So I think a lot of people do that. So yeah, well, I'm glad it's meant a lot to you. I enjoy doing it. Like I said, it is a lot of time, but it's fun time. Like it's fun being able to share these characters with people and get people who wouldn't necessarily read them on their own or check those books out. People are a lot more willing to listen to something while they're passively listen while they're doing something active, like working or driving, than they are to like sit down and read. And how many people actually read anymore anyway, like regular books? And then,
well, I do, but I'm weird. So.
Well, yeah, we're weird though. So, but yeah, like, you know, most people don't sit down to read books. And if they do, they're not comic books usually.
Yeah.
So, and then with that, they're probably more popular characters like Superman or Batman or whatever. They're not automatically going to be like, oh yes, Swamp Thing, I'll check this out. Or Hellblazer, what is this? Because it says Hellblazer too. It's not even John Constantine, which they might know the name Constantine from the movie. It's Hellblazer, so they might not even know that that's the same character. So that's why in the title of this podcast, I put John Constantine, a Hellblazer podcast. So that if you search for either of those things, it works. But
it's there. Yeah, it's there. Everybody, you got to check these out. You got to, start from the beginning. And if you catch up to where we are now and want to know what happens next, like Matt said, he's way ahead in the Patreon. You got to come join us there. On the Hellblazer tier.
Thank you for the plug.
So you can catch up.
Yeah, so if you want,
this stuff gets crazy.
Yes, yeah, it only gets better from here. I think I mean, Jamie Delano's run is no slouch. Like I think it's a pretty solid run of comics. But when Garth Ennis takes over at issue 41, it only gets better. And then, in my opinion, at least. And then, if you would like to, I think we're like almost through Garth Ennis's run right now. We're on issue 74 as of this week. So if you would like to join our Patreon to get access to all those episodes, you can go to patreon.com/planes, trains, and comic books, all one word. And with that, I think, unless there's anything else, we'll see you on the next one.
See you guys later.
Bye.